go. Welcome back, everyone. Another episode of the Wobcast 2.0. It's episode 9 of season 2 already of the Wobcast 2.0. The offseason just rolls along, steamrolling the sports calendar. Yeah, we have little things that pop up here and there that we like March Madness and the Masters, but it's all NFL all the time. NFL continues to dominate the sports landscape, and its main tentpole event of the offseason, inching closer and closer. That is the NFL draft. And we're going to talk about the draft here on this episode of the Wobcast, but we're going to talk about a couple of other things as well. The main thing we're going to talk about is cornerbacks for the Minnesota Vikings. What worked and what didn't last year, and what do we project will happen this year from a personnel and a schematic standpoint for the Minnesota Vikings at cornerback. To do all of that, I'm going to need some help, and help is here, and that is my partner. It's Gyles. He's here. It's just him and I today, no Chase. So we'll try and keep this thing on the rails as we talk corners, NFL draft, and a few other odds and ends with regard to the Vikings and the NFL. Glad you are with us and listening. Gyles, glad you're here as well. How you doing, bud?
I'm doing well. Happy Friday. Definitely exciting times. We're one step closer, 1 inch away from the NFL draft here in 2023. I'm just beyond excitement. This is going to be really exciting. Just got back from Florida. Was doing a little reconnaissance in the Florida state about Brian Flores, trying to see what he likes and doesn't like to get my hands dirty, get close to the vest there. So excited to see where Brian Flores will head, especially when you think about the cornerback room.
Yeah, I'm excited too, and looking forward to some of what you have to say there with regard to Flores. I know that you're very high on Flores in general. I think the cornerback position is one where he can have an extra effective hand in how things go. I think sort of, I don't know if I would say that's his bread and butter, but maybe it is his bread and butter. So a lot to talk about with that. And that is going to be segment 1 of this episode. But before we get to that, just a few things that we should discuss NFL wise. The Washington Commanders sold for over $6.5 billion with a B dollars, Gyles. $6.5 billion. I don't remember what Daniel Snyder bought the team for, but I think it was like, I don't even want to speculate because it might be way off. I thought it was like 800 million or something. I can't remember what he bought it for.
That number sounds right.
Yeah.
But way less than what he sold it for.
I mean, the most an American professional sports team has ever been sold for. I think Daniel Snyder owned it for 24 years. He owns it no more. Obviously, a guy who's been on the receiving end of a lot of vitriol of late. I think a very rocky tenure as owner, but that has come to an end. So it's a new era for the Commanders. But $6.5 billion kind of puts a dagger through the idea of you and I ever owning a team together.
Yeah, I mean, maybe next year. I know it's been a good year, so we'll have to see.
Okay.
Come Q3, maybe things will shape around. But honestly, the moment I saw that hit, my mind immediately went to the Dallas Cowboys. I think they're pretty universally considered to be the most valuable franchise in football. Yeah. And so if the Commanders go for $8 billion, or that many billion, what will the Cowboys go for if and when they ever sell?
Exactly.
My goodness, everything is just skyrocketing in valuation.
10 plus, I would say 10 plus for sure. Because the Commanders, who formerly, of course, were the Redskins, at a time, the Redskins, I think, would have been upper echelon NFL brands and just sort of panache, I think. Now, not anymore for a lot of reasons. The Cowboys, however, number one. I mean, with a bullet, right? Yeah, number one with the bullet. Yep. So that would be interesting to see if they put a for sale sign up in their yard, what that would command. But
my goodness, the Jones family would be skipping down the street.
Yeah, I would say so. I don't see that happening though. And I think the NFL is better with the Jones family leading the Cowboys. They are a lightning rod like Daniel Snyder was, but for different reasons and for healthy reasons. So anyway, I have a big one here that I want to get to, but I'll leave that for last. Lamar Jackson and Aaron Rodgers. If I said, Gyles, in 10 seconds, tell me where they're playing next year and tell me when we will know where they're playing next year, what would you say on Lamar Jackson and Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, Lamar Jackson, he's staying in Baltimore, mostly because he's representing himself. And I don't think that's necessarily a great idea. And I don't think any team is going to make the the effort to go acquire him for a lot of reasons, considering the cap space and the trade capital required to make that happen. And the fact that the Baltimore Ravens just got OBJ. So I think he's staying there. For Aaron Rodgers, I do expect him still to go to the Jets. I'm expecting that to be a same day the draft type trade. I imagine they're going to wait to see how the draft board falls to be able to see what type of compensation is required. I think they're trying to give themselves flexibility on both sides.
I think you're right about that. I have heard, and we don't know this because we're not privy to the conversations ourselves, so we can only keep our ear to the ground and speculate. I am hearing that there is some element of the Jets or Packers saying, hey, the compensation should be on a sliding scale based on how Rodgers performs and if he plays beyond next year or not. If the Jets are saying that, if I were the Packers, I would balk at that quite a bit. And I'd say, this guy is on the back nine of his career, to say the least. He's probably on like hole 16 or 17. And we as the Packers have had to deal with not knowing if he's going to play next year or not for 5 years. If you want Aaron Rodgers, that's just something you got to deal with. So, I mean, I think I would balk at that, if I'm Green Bay. I'm like, the cost is the cost. Now, if you want to throw in, if you win the Super Bowl, you have to pay more or whatever, that I can go with. But whether or not he retires or plays for you, I mean, that's a risk you just have to absorb, I think, with Aaron Rodgers.
I completely agree. That's just, it comes with the entire package deal.
Yeah. All right. I looked at, the wife and I and some friends took a road trip to Diamond Joe's in Iowa. Okay. Yeah. And so I took a look down there at the win totals, in season long win totals for some NFL teams. I want to throw 4 out at you that stood out to me that I have an opinion on, over under. And I want to see where you and I align and where we do not on this. And we'll do this very quickly. Let's start with the Atlanta Falcons. Their over-under season-long win total for 2023 is 7.5. Do you have an opinion over or under on that, or do you think it's a good number?
That seems honestly like a good number. I think this year it'll be maybe an under, but I do see them as a team that's starting to round back. I think they're putting in some investments where I think next year they're going to be more or less a contender in that division. I think they're just one more year away, though.
Okay. I don't think you've said anything that I would strongly disagree with. However, I would play the over on the Falcons. I'm a little bullish on the Falcons, Gyles. And let's see if this continues. Like once we get into training camp time, I kind of like what's going on there. The big question with them is Desmond Ridder is their young quarterback, obviously. Absolutely. So if they're right on him, I think this is way over. Oh, if it's middle of the road-ish, I think 7.5 is a good number. But they signed Jesse Bates, the safety from the Bengals. And there's another addition they made on defense that I really like that I'm losing track of right now. And I think it was a secondary. Oh no, they traded for Jeff Okudah from the Lions.
Oh yes, from the Lions for a 5th round pick.
So I like that. I like their head coach Arthur Smith. Cordero Patterson is there. Drake London, the receiver. Kyle Pitts. I don't hate their offensive line. I kind of like what's going on there. So
I agree.
And it's a weak division. I think
very
they
weak division.
Beat Tampa once, maybe twice. I think they beat Carolina once, maybe twice. And
are you hating on Adam Thielen right now? What's going on here?
No, I'm not. No, come on now. Don't tell Adam I said that. I like Atlanta. All right, here's another one. Houston, 5.5.
Oh, to be honest, I'm going to go under.
Okay. So you're still down on Houston.
I'm sorry. I might be totally way wrong. I know they're trying to do some rebuilding things, but my confidence in them is not strong.
Okay. They're going to get either CJ Stroud or Bryce Young, right? I think that's who they're going to draft, a quarterback. New head coach, not a great division. I mean, I know they got to win to take over on this and win. They have to win 6 games. So that's the hard part, because they get to 5 and you haven't gotten there yet.
Correct. Which is not nothing when you're a bad franchise. 6 wins.
Agreed.
I mean, it's not saying it's great, but it's not nothing. Yeah.
I don't hate their offensive line in Houston. And I think they're going to they're going to have a quarterback that excites you, Stroud or Young. Like you may not evaluate them and love them for your team, but you must concede they're getting the first or second quarterback off the board, that there is opportunity there at least.
That's fair.
So that one stuck out to me a little bit because it's a pretty low number. All right, two more. San Francisco, 11.5.
Quick question on that. Is that assuming that who is at quarterback?
Right. Well, if you bet it now,
okay.
Whoever is the quarterback.
Okay.
Yeah.
11.5.
So you got to get to 12.
I'm going to say over.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the 49ers. I loved Kyle Shanahan.
Me too.
I say that very tentatively. I recognize that's a bit of a hot take. That's a lot of wins. But I think if you can get their main quarterback back, I think you have a shot. If you're playing Darnold, I don't think so.
Right.
So it is kind of an assumption that the Purdy is under center, but I think over.
I am on the other side of this. I would play the under.
Okay.
I'm a big Shanahan guy too. I like the guy. A few episodes ago, we talked about an experiences I had with him at the Senior Bowl in 2012. He's a great guy and a great coach. And I think the Niners are really good defensively. I think
even
they're
better
tough
now that they signed Hargrave from the Eagles.
Yeah, true. And one of my favorite stats last year in the NFL was like 12 weeks in a row, the team that played the Niners lost their next game.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I
Very
love that.
Physical.
Yeah. They lose D'Amico Ryans. I don't love that. I don't love their quarterback situation. I didn't look at their schedule, but I have a feeling it's tough because they won their division. So you have a tough schedule. Even if Purdy comes back, I think there's a fair question of like, was that lightning in a bottle last year for Brock Purdy, or is he legit good? So I am more on the under here. But I see why one would be optimistic about them. I mean, they're a damn good team. They got a great roster, a good defense, good leadership. So,
and probably the least decline in terms of people leaving the roster in the NFL. Like they were able to be
retained
continuous. Yeah,
for sure.
100%. They have a great offensive line, one of the best weapon sets in the NFL, probably the best coach in football. You have an amazing defense, and you added Javon Hargrave. I'm expecting them to bounce back. Now, maybe they're at only 10 or 11 wins. I mean, obviously the variance can be a little bit there, but I do expect them to be a good team again.
All right. So we're on the opposite sides of San Francisco. We're on the opposite sides of Houston, and we're kind of both on the fence on Atlanta, or you're on the fence maybe a little bit, but I'm on the over.
Yeah.
All right. Last one, Vikings, 8.5.
I'm just thinking about this because I'm getting to a place where I think they're going to move on from Cousins. So if it's not Cousins, I don't see them going over. However, if they have Cousins, I will pick over.
I totally agree with you on if Cousins, if not Cousins. If no Cousins, I couldn't possibly play over on this because I'm thinking really hard with Cousins. And the number one reason, Gyles, is the schedule. Now we don't know the order in which they will play their opponents, but we know who they're playing, and it is not easy.
No, it's very difficult.
It is not an easy schedule.
Extra road game this year.
Yeah. I'm over on this with Cousins for sure, though. I got myself, thinking about it when we were down there, and I did play it. I actually played over on this. However, you're right. I'm not to the point where I think they're moving on from Cousins. And you saying that is interesting to me. And maybe we'll get into that a little bit in segment 2 when we're talking about pre-draft press conference with Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell, but I don't think it's a bad
scenario
number.
Past you.
Yeah.
What if Kirk Cousins is at the Niners? Are they over or under 11.5?
Over 11.5. Yes. Then I'm selling my under ticket on the Niners, and with the proceeds of that, I'm buying over. Or I'm selling my Vikings over, and with that, I'm buying Niners over. So anyway,
extra, read all about it.
Yeah. So fun to talk about. At the end of the day, those win totals, over unders, they're pretty damn spot on. I mean, it's they
don't build buildings like that for nothing.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Okay. Very last one before we get into Vikings corners. So how last week, Gyles, we talked about that weird headline that came out with regard to Jalen Carter, where Drew Rosenhaus is like, we're not visiting any teams that aren't in the top 10. Remember that? I thought that was just such a weird headline. This is another one that has struck a chord with me for like a few months. It was CJ Stroud number one for sure to Carolina. CJ Stroud, or to whoever was number one. It's flipped. It's Bryce Young now. Everyone is mocking Bryce Young number one. I don't know what has happened. They've not played any games. They're the same player that they were, 3 months ago. But now there's no one. I can't find a mock draft with Stroud going to the Panthers at 1.
No.
So I don't know if the secret's out, if someone said something that everyone picked up on. Have you noticed this, or do you have any thoughts on this at all?
I do think there is some smoke screen typical to the NFL, but I also think the dynamic of Anthony Richardson plays into this. I saw a big headline this morning, I forget, from one of the big ones, highlighting that the Panthers are still considering Anthony Richardson for number one.
Wow,
so obviously that has a ripple effect as well, right? When you think about the players that, or the teams in position to draft 2 and then 3, that can obviously affect the style of quarterback that they want, right? Because they're different quarterbacks. Both, I think, are highly regarded, but they are different. So it kind of depends on your offensive philosophy and how you want to build your team. And then factoring into who is picking number 3. Is it the Cardinals? Is it, who is it? So I think Anthony Richardson is also affecting that if he goes number 1 overall.
Interesting. Yeah, I can't wait to watch this unfold, because this very, very often, especially when teams up at the top, Gyles, need quarterbacks, very often you know what's happening. There aren't surprises. Surprises happen when teams up toward the top don't need quarterbacks. I remember when the Texans, it was the year Reggie Bush was coming out.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, Reggie Bush, number 1 overall pick. It's clear he's the best player in college football. And then the Texans, the night before the draft, reached agreement in principle with Mario Williams, the defensive end. And that was like, whoa, like everyone's like, well, we got to go look and see if we're comfortable with Reggie Bush here, because he might be on the board when we pick. Now, he ended up going number 2. So it didn't matter, but that's when surprises happen. And I think we're going to have some surprises this year, even though all those teams up at the top want quarterbacks. I'm excited to see. It's Carolina, Houston, Arizona right now, top 3. Indy's slated to be 4th. I'm not convinced they're picking 4th. I think if the quarterback Indy likes is not there, I think they're willing to move out. And a team like Las Vegas could come up and pick there, or Minnesota, or someone who's got a quarterback they like who's still there. I think they come up to 4 and swap with Indy. Yeah. So.
Or if they trade up to 3, if the one they do want is there at 3, but they think someone else will trade into the 3rd spot and grab them.
Sure. And so Arizona is the one that moves back then. You're
correct.
Saying. Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. And then another interesting thing is who the first defender off the board is. I think that'll be interesting to see, because I think Jalen Carter's the best player, but I think some teams are uncomfortable with him. So then it would be Will Anderson, I believe, who would be first. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. So
I personally think it will be Will Anderson. I think he'll be number 1 overall, or the best defensive player.
Best defensive player. Yeah, I agree. All right. Speaking of defense, let's talk Vikings defense, guys. Let's get into cornerback. As we have gone through the roster position by position, we have left cornerbacks for last. They are certainly not least in terms of importance or interest with Vikings fan base. So I think the way we should lay this out is, let's talk about the personnel changes. Let's talk about a schematic change, and then let's talk about the draft. I'll begin with personnel changes, which have been numerous, I would say. Wouldn't you?
A lot.
Okay.
A lot of changes in the quarterback room.
Patrick Peterson gone. Cameron Dantzler gone. Duke Shelley gone. Chris Boyd gone. Byron Murphy signed. Andrew Booth, Caleb Evans emerging on the mend, on the rise.
Yep. Shannon Sullivan gone.
Yes, Shannon Sullivan gone. Right. So significant changes personnel wise. From a PFF standpoint, data, snaps, performance rankings, when you look at just the personnel of it, Gyles, do you think, if you view it through a PFF lens, that the changes are positive?
From a PFF lens, no. From a schematic standpoint, I think maybe. When you look at PFF, Caleb Evans, he ended the year at a 47.2 grade. He played 162 snaps. Andrew Booth Jr. ended the year at a 45.3 grade with 105 snaps. So both were essentially in the train wreck category. Now, granted, they weren't necessarily used a ton, and in the categories that they were used, they were playing through injury, and there's a few different issues that can also affect that grade. But obviously, when you look at it on face value from a PFF standpoint, not great. Caleb Evans was very, very, very good in run defense. He ended the year at a 76 grade in run, but had a 40 grade in coverage. Andrew Booth had a 41 grade in coverage, so both were not good. Now, if anyone can save them, it's Brian Flores. I truly believe that. That's not me being a homer. If you were to interview people from all across the league and identify who is the best teacher from a coverage standpoint, Brian Flores is going to be in the top 5 conversation. So okay. I'm really excited to see if they can be saved. But with that being said, they're the only 2 people on the roster that we have this year that we had last year. Out of the 7 people that we had on the roster last year, only 2 are back. And both of them were the worst corners that we had. Now, obviously we added Byron Murphy, which we can get to in a second, but ultimately that is in a difficult spot. So I'm really interested to see how they'll go attack the cornerback room, because if you look at this lens, they had 7 cornerbacks on the roster, and right now we only have 3. So that means you would need 4 additional cornerbacks in order to go into this next year's season with the same number of cornerbacks. Yep. That's a really difficult place to be in. When you think about the absolute need of a team, cornerback has to be at the top of the list.
That's a tough spot to be in general. It's a tough spot to be at this point of the offseason. I mean, meaningful free agent signings are not done, but I mean, you're a bargain bin now. You're at the dollar store now, right? I mean, yeah. So it's hard to populate that position with high quality talent here, unless you've got a bunch of picks in the top 100, which we're going to get to here in a little bit. But before we talk draft and schematic, you did touch on one name that we need to dig in a little bit further on, and that is Byron Murphy.
Yep.
Now, not every high profile free agent signing is a good free agent signing. We will see how this plays out. My early sense, though, is that this is a good one. I was very positive on the signing of Byron Murphy. How about you?
Yep. I have mixed feelings about this. My gut reaction to it is very, very positive. I think situationally, he is a top 10 corner in quite a few different categories. But when you look at it from a measurement standpoint, he does struggle quite a bit. He ended the 2022 season with a 66 grade. Now, that's not horrible, but it's also not great. So when you think about your cornerback, he only had a 63 grade in coverage. So I would say he's in an okay category. If I'm making a prediction, though, with Byron Murphy, I honestly think we're going to play him in the slot. I think he's going to be a nickel cornerback, and we are going to find outside cornerbacks outside of Byron Murphy. I truly believe that, whether that's us drafting someone, or I think there's a chance that a trade could happen. I don't expect us to go into the season with him being the best corner. I really don't. When you look at the kind of the recipe book for a Brian Flores defense, I think it requires really aggressive cornerbacks and really good cornerbacks. Now, I believe Andrew Booth Jr. is a boom and bust type cornerback. I think he got burned a lot in this last season, but he is a guy that is very aggressive. So I think he fits into the philosophy of what Brian Flores wants to do. So if he's a guy that is fast and he just runs at things, but is wrong, he's fast and wrong. If you can get him into being fast and right, I think you now have an above average cornerback in Andrew Booth Jr. So if they're able to mold him, and that's an if, don't get me wrong, but if we're able to do that, I think you have one of those outside cornerbacks tackled. And if you can have Byron Murphy play the nickel, I think you're in a really interesting spot.
So I am totally fine with Byron Murphy playing a bunch of nickel. I would not subscribe to the opinion of like, oh, really? All that money for a nickel corner? Because I'm like, the Vikings are in the lead a lot and they're in sub packages more than a lot of teams are. And even if you're in the lead half the time, you're in sub packages 60, 70% of the game. So you're going to need 3 anyway. And a lot of teams' best receiver plays inside or is their slot receiver. So that I'd be totally fine with that. The way you just talked about it though, Gyles, is like then corner's got to be the pick at 23, or at least there's got to be one of two or three positions that's going to get picked at 23.
I think we're about to enter a season where a lot of things are going to happen because we only have 5 picks in this year's draft. I'm also of the opinion that they want to trade up and grab a quarterback. So that's 2 things that are very difficult to do, where you have already little compensation and you want to go spend a lot. And you also have 4 cornerback spots open on your roster, right? So I do expect them to do a little bit of noise in the trade market, where I think Dalvin Cook, he'll bring back at least a 5th or a 6th round pick, I would imagine. Yep. There's a chance I think they could trade Danielle Hunter. I know that's been getting a lot more steam as of late. I really think that there's going to be a lot more that happens that either brings a cornerback into the room via trade, or it gives us more trade capital to be able to draft one in maybe the 2nd or the 3rd round.
Interesting. You make a good point, and one I was going to bring up when we discussed the pre-draft press conference, because Kwesi said something interesting about the number of picks that you have in a draft, and so we'll get to that here in a little bit. But essentially, what we're looking at here then is, as we've talked about this here today, Gyles, I'm just envisioning like a construction site with like a whole bunch of like cranes, and like there's like cement trucks, and like the cornerback position is just under construction. And like, I think there's a couple of like tall buildings and pillars that look really good in there, but around it is like scaffolding and cranes and dirt, and there's no like nice looking grass and, good shrubbery, and like, it's not shiny buildings and cars driving around. It's under construction, right?
Could not agree more. And I think there's a number of different ways that you can go tackle that. But I definitely think they're going to have to be very strategic this offseason because, it really centers around the quarterback position and deciding what you want to do with that, both for this year and for the next coming era, so to speak, because your decision there has a ripple effect on how you go build all those shrubs around the skyscrapers.
Yep. Got it. Let's talk schematics a little bit, and scheme and deployment of corners and how you do it. Brian Flores. The perception is aggressive, lots of blitzing, lots of pressure, high risk, high reward, that whole thing. Mm-hmm. I think that's true. However, I think Brian Flores would like to temper that a little bit and say, hey, I'm not some cavalier wildcat out here who's just throwing caution to the wind and taking chances. Like, I have a rhyme and reason and a way that we do things here. So the truth, I think, is somewhere in the middle of that. But I think the flavor is aggression. Yeah. And is getting away from just being resigned as a defense to let the offense set the tone and always be responsive to that. And I think Flores is like, no, we're going to make them respond to what we're doing from time to time here. Yeah. And Zim was like that on 3rd downs. Zim was like that on 2nd and long. Zim was like that in the red zone. Zim was like that when they were backed up. Zim was like that in 2 minutes. But I think Flores is going to be like that all the time. Yep. So that's a big adjustment. And we talked about this a little bit with the, in the personnel changes, but I can't wait to see how this unfolds and to get reports out of practices, to listen to him at press conferences, and then to watch the first few games to see what this looks like. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I think I absolutely agree with the aggression point. I think a Brian Flores defense, if you break it down to its core fundamental level, they want to be perceived as a wild card. Like, I don't care what down it is. We might send a corner and blitz you. Like, that is a real threat almost every down. And having that threat causes the offense to be on their toes, right? Versus like, oh, they're not going to be aggressive until 3rd down. Like, you have no idea what's coming. And I think that's the true intent and objective of Brian Flores defense. Now, that being said, I do believe that the safety is far more of a blitzer in that type of defense than the cornerback. But with that being said, I think they want to be a wild card type element. So I'm very interested to see how they go tackle that because we have some pretty big speed on our team if we can leverage it correctly. Now, I don't want to get too recklessly speculative here, but we have, I'm going to say a little heavier safety room right now. When you think about it, when you think about some faster linebackers and Brian Asamoah, we have a little bit of a larger safety room. I'm wondering if they're going to maybe shake things up a little bit and deploy some certain packages where they're going to have a lot of defensive backs, maybe less cornerback, but more safety when they blitz a lot, be able to cover the backfield. Because as long as we're fast, we can adapt to things if things start to pick up. But I don't know. I'm very interested to see how they'll go tackle this.
Interesting point, Gyles. In the last episode of the Wobcast 2.0, we did talk about safeties, and we kind of feel like it's a sneaky strength on the roster right now, right? Whereas this is more, I don't think we're ready to call corner a weakness yet. It's more of an unknown. It's more in development. If we have this type of feeling about the position, what is it? It's April 14th. If this is how we feel about it on August 14th, I will call it a weakness. Okay. But right now it's still in development. Safety, I think, is a strength, and it will be interesting to see the relationship between those two positions, how they work together, and how Flores could compensate for opportunity or weakness at the cornerback position, compensate for that with the play of his safeties. There's definitely a relationship there. All right, let's move on from personnel to scheme to draft. I think we both feel strongly that in an ideal world, you'd be able to use a top 30, top 40 pick on a corner in this year's draft, right?
Yep.
I don't have a really strong opinion on which corner I think they could target at 23 or at 28 or at 35 or wherever they end up picking.
Yep.
I do think that they have good options, though.
I completely agree. I think a couple things can be true. If we speculate that we believe the Vikings are going to trade up, I'd be of the mind to go draft Christian Gonzalez from Oregon. I think he's technically ranked 11th on the big board, but he is pretty much everything you could ever want from a good cornerback. I mean, he's big, he's fast, he has all the length, like he has the ball skills. He's a guy that I would be willing to trade up for if you do plan on trading up for a cornerback. If you say, hey, this is a position of need, we need to trade up, Christian Gonzalez would be the guy to go for it. I think depending on how the draft plays out, I think there's a chance he could fall a little bit further than normal, in other drafts, just because of the wide receiver and quarterback and edge rusher market. I think there's an interesting possibility he falls into the mid-teens when he's really a top 10 pick, in my opinion. But if you're staying pat at 23, I think there's a chance that you could get Joey Porter Jr. from Penn State. Technically, I think he's 18th on the big board. But I think once again, as the board falls out, I think there's a chance he could fall down to 23. And he's another guy that I think, he's big. He's 6'2", 198 pounds. He's a very aggressive guy. So when you think about a good scheme fit or personality fit, I think Joey Porter Jr. really fits that. If you do trade back, for example, if you're like wanting to pick up a second round pick, but still draft in the first round, that's where maybe Emmanuel Forbes from Mississippi State is a guy that you want to go after. I think he's technically 31st on the big board, but he's another guy that I think fits into a lot of what we want to do. He's not a top 10 corner, so I think there's definitely some development that needs to happen there. He's a little bit on the lighter side from a weight standpoint, so I think his notch against him is a little small. But once again, cornerback is a point of need, if you don't plan on addressing it any other way.
Yep. So Gyles, and really I think this started changing a little bit when Zimmer was hired, but for a long time with Brad Childress into Leslie Frazier, the defensive style and scheme the Vikings played was primarily cover two and a lot of Tampa two, but definitely cover two. And they wanted thick, broad, tall corners who are physical, because a big part of that scheme is rerouting receivers at the line, and you're playing zone and letting them go, but you want to be able to reroute them at the line. And so a lot of times whenever we were talking about corner as a priority free agent signing or as a top 50 draft pick, if you weren't 6'1" or 6'2", I mean, you're basically out. You weren't under consideration. That has changed now. And it's still great if you can get a guy that big, right? But now I think it's more about movement and athleticism and all of that. And so I think it opens up the possibilities of who you can draft as a corner if you're the Vikings. So it's just a change in the way I look at drafts. I mean, because honestly, working for the team, I didn't have to give as much credence to the players at different positions that didn't fit the mold. Like I knew exactly what they wanted out of certain positions. And if you didn't have some of the main characteristics, you were basically out when it came to a high pick.
Yes.
And so it's not that way anymore. So the world is much more open now at corner. And I really think they should take one with one of their first couple picks.
Yep. And in fact, I think they're going to need to, unless they plan on addressing it via trade or picking up any other person on free agency, because they have 4 empty spots in the roster. So you got to fill it somehow.
I wonder if they were involved in the Jalen Ramsey trade talks at all at any point, you know?
I definitely think they would have inquired. I mean, because I think Kwesi is one of those guys, but I think in terms of the trade capital required to get it, his cap hit, and his age, more importantly, I would have guessed that they would have been like the price is right. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
love the idea. We definitely need to fit it in, but I think they would have preferred to go another route, which obviously they're going down that path.
Yep. All right. In the interest of time spent here, I'm ready to move on to reacting to what was said at the pre-draft press conference, but I want to make sure we've dotted all of our I's and crossed all our T's at corner. Anything left in your notebook that we want to hit on here before we move?
Unless we draft Anthony Richardson at 3, we draft Zay Flowers at 23. I really think we're going to get Emmanuel Forbes at 31. I really think they're going to trade out if they can't get Zay Flowers at our current pick, or they can trade up and grab a quarterback. We'll see. I might be way off and proven wrong, but that's my position now.
I think in terms of roster building, you know, the way we talk about the draft all the time, Gyles, I think is the way teams talk about it, honestly. It's very easy to look at the draft the wrong way, get caught up in the moment and be like, we're only supposed to win 7 games next year. How can we get that 9? Who should we draft to get us to 9 wins? That is not how you look at the draft. You are planting seeds and you are building rosters for this year, next year, and the year after. In viewing it through that prism, I am totally fine with the receiver at 23 or the corner at 31. I think that's really that's really sound drafting if that's the way they go. However, if Cousins is not the quarterback, Gyles, I don't know if I really love receiver at 23. At that point, I'm more resigned to be like, geez, the offense is kind of a work in progress here. Let's shore up the defense, because if we have a quarterback who's a work in progress and a defense that gives up a lot of big plays in the passing game, I mean, that's a nightmare.
I agree.
You know?
I think, the only argument to still take a wide receiver if Cousins isn't your quarterback is that you want to build the best infrastructure around that quarterback. And if you feel like you can systematize the offense to produce success, but otherwise I would agree the defense has a few holes that you need to tackle.
Agree. I know what you're saying there, Gyles, but they have Hawkinson and Jefferson, you know, so I'm kind of like if you want to tell me halfway through the year or at the end of the year, hey, our young quarterback, it was his first year, we got to surround him with more weapons. I'd be like, well, you have Hawkinson and Jefferson. I mean,
I would put it in the same category as the Niners trading for Christian McCaffrey, looking for yet another weapon that can be a dual threat. And I only say that with the lens of Zay Flowers, who is more of more Deebo Samuel than Christian McCaffrey, but someone that can be a dual threat to be that third weapon that, like, not only do I have to account for both Justin Jefferson and Hawkinson, but now I have this Deebo Samuel-like player on the field. You can't account for all 3, which gives your quarterback 3 phenomenal options. Yeah. So that would be my only thought, but I agree. Defense is probably the route they're going.
Yeah. All righty. I listened to the press conference that the Vikings held, which every team does, pre-draft press conference. Nothing really big stood out to me. Just 2 small things. The first was about 7 minutes into it. They were asked, hey, basically, are you going to address the quarterback position in the draft? And Kwesi gave a really good non-committal answer. But what he said, so non-committal answer does not always mean it was a BS answer and the wrong answer. He said, it's the most important position in the game. We're always looking at it, and we're looking at it from a long-term perspective. And it's like, exactly. I mean, and we talked about this, Gyles, the last 2 episodes. It's like, you're probably going to have to draft a quarterback, if not this year, for sure next year. And it's more likely than not that you're going to have Cousins on the roster when you do this, and you're going to have a difficult conversation with him. Like, you're our guy. We love you, whatever, but we got to think about down the road. And you've immediately damaged, you're immediately suboptimal in your relationship with Cousins, but it's basically unavoidable. I don't, I mean,
unless you're willing to put yourself in a position where you move on from him and then run the risk of trying to draft one without having one, I think that's a really dangerous precedent.
Me too. I do. I think that too. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing is something that you touched on already, Gyles, and that is the fact that the Vikings right now are slated to have not very many picks. Every GM wants lots of picks, but Rick Spielman really wanted lots of picks. And I think Kwesi does too. Do you think he does?
Yeah. I think he's a volume guy.
Yeah, me too. And so you're totally right that the Vikings are going to be a team where at the end of the draft, you're like, hey, let's look at the trade tracker. You're going to see a lot of Norsemans on the screen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know if it's up first and then back a whole bunch of times, or if it's back, and then you come up in the later rounds, you turn 7s and 6s into 5s. I don't know how it's going to go. They're not going to end the draft with just 5 picks. I know that. Yeah. So
especially when you pair that with the idea that they have the least amount of cap space in the NFL right now. So especially when you think about spending resources on players in a non-draft format, you don't have much money to play with unless you restructure somebody else.
Yep. So I don't get a sense that you have a steadfast opinion yet that this is what they are doing in the first round. I think you can see a couple of different avenues they go. Am I right?
Yes. I think there's a few different angles. I do see them in a stronger position now more than ever to draft a quarterback, but I mean, that is still speculation. That's me reading between the tea leaves here. I think based on what they've done with Cousins' contract is by far and away the most revealing to me. It shows me that they are prepared to move on from him, but still want a fallback option if things fall through. But they've reconstructed that contract in a way that makes it clear that they're going after a quarterback, whether it's this year or next year.
How could you get a quarterback in this draft without trading Cousins to acquire the pick that it would take to get that quarterback? Can that happen? You'd have to really love Will Levis, wouldn't you? How else could you?
Or you do trade up to 3, or you trade up to 4 if you think that the Colts will trade out of that.
Yeah, but wouldn't you have to include Cousins in that deal?
You wouldn't have to. I mean, you'd have to still keep his cap hit, but I think you'd have to trade this year's first. Yeah, I mean,
23
swap. Yep. Next year's first.
Okay.
Probably the year after first and a player if you're moving up to the 3 position, which more than likely is a Danielle Hunter type. Maybe you could squeeze Dalvin Cook in there. Honestly, if I prefer it, I'd prefer to trade Dalvin Cook in that and keep Danielle Hunter. But I think you'd have to leverage something like that to be able to make that happen. Which is a lot. Don't get me wrong. You'd have to love the player you're going up for. But I really think that they're putting themselves into a position to move on from Cousins. But they haven't moved on from Cousins because they want to have a fallback. I mean, there's never really been a 3-way trade from what I can remember. Correct me if I'm wrong, to be able to do a 3-way trade with the Niners. But I think that is by far and away the easiest place to send him. The only other route would be just letting him play out his contract and letting him hit free agency next offseason.
God, I cannot wait to see how it unfolds. There's a lot of different ways it could go. I think the stalemate with the Vikings and Cousins has to do with guaranteed money in the next contract. And how much do you want to guarantee a 35-year-old quarterback? Yes, he's durable. Yes, he's productive, but he's 35. And how much do you want to guarantee a guy at that stage of his career? Very interesting. Would love to be a fly on the wall, in those rooms where they're talking about it. The Vikings path definitely undefined. It is not obvious, and that's going to be what makes it fun in the lead up to the draft and then on draft day. So, unfortunately, that's going to be the end of this episode of the Wobcast 2.0. But fortunately, another episode of the Wobcast 2.0 is forthcoming very soon. We'll be back in a few days. We have not talked about specialists, Gyles. We're going to talk about specialists in the next episode of the Wobcast, both the ones the Vikings have and the ones they lost, but also some that they could acquire here before the 2023 regular season begins. So we'll hit on that, and then it will be very draft heavy in the next episode of the Wobcast. So we thank you for listening to this one. We hope you listen to the next one. To catch former and future Wobcasts, make sure you subscribe and like us. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify, as well as YouTube. Come find us on social media as well. We love interacting with all of you there. You can find me on Twitter @Wobby. Enjoy the weekend, everyone, and then come back early next week as we talk more Vikings position by position analysis. We hit on the specialists and we talk more NFL draft. On behalf of Gyles and Chase, this is Wobby signing off for now. Skol Vikings.